L'Etape du Tour, Stage 2. This one had a very different profile from Stage 1. Stage 1 had one super big climb in it. This one is a circuit we're doing twice. It's got one tiny climb, one climb that's about 5 minutes for me. You can see I'm front row here because I know that it's going to be fast and furious from the start. People are not as scared this week. I think the previous week, having a big climb like that, to some degree, the most serious people, the people who know what they're doing and they're going to pace well, are going to save something for that climb. On a stage like this, it's going to be ballistic, and you're going to have to make that group that rolls a lot of this flat section really, really fast. So getting everything ready here, getting my ice sock in, getting situated. A lot of these races, I get the whole shot. Today, I'm not going to try and go that hard. I'm going to do about 400 watts off the line, I think. 430, a little bit higher. So I did get the whole shot a little bit, but not too much. I didn't go extreme off the front because I knew there weren't going to be extra matches to burn today. I knew that it was going to be hard from the gun. Same as last week, I knew it was super important to get a start up near the front, so I was already logged in, paired, riding around everything with 30 minutes to start, and pretty much had my finger hovering over the button. So right when that join event button showed up, I pushed it and got in this world, and then I went and got my ice sock, water, all that stuff situated in the 30 minutes between, got warmed up, all of that. So I'm making the front group here, but you can see people are continuing to just surge past me, and I don't necessarily want to be at the front, but I want to stay far enough forward that the splits that are inevitably going to happen, I'm going to be in front of them. I know this effort should be about an hour long, so that's going to feel like a crit style effort, and I'm going to come back to that a little later. There's some more stuff to talk about there, but I basically know that I got to stay in contact with this front group, at least closing in on the climb. So the first climb is around like 13K. It's not a big climb, but that's probably where it's going to start to break up. And then the quote-unquote big climb, again, it's only about 5 minutes long, averages like 4 or 5%. That comes around 16K, between 16 and 17K, and we're doing both of those twice. So another thing to know is that this climb, it's not one of those like up and then you're on some sort of plateau, or there's basically no flat between the up and the down. So you really got to make sure as you're doing that big climb, the 5 minute climb, that as you come over the top, you're with the group you want to be with going down, because the dynamics on Zwift, the descending, you go so much faster in a group, and if you're a little bit off the back of a group, you're probably going to miss it. If you're a little bit off the back, you're probably not going to get back. They're going to extend that gap on you on the downhill, even if you're pushing pretty significant wattage. And the inverse of that is if you're a little bit off the front of a group, they are inevitably going to pick you up, and you wasted some watts getting that like 5 or 10 second gap that is just going to come back. So that's sort of the tactical stuff that's going through my mind here. I'm trying to keep an eye on the map in the top right hand. The little orange dot there is me, and then all the other bluish grayish dots are everyone else. So I can't totally see over the top here, and this is one of those things that's like a Zwift specific tactic. You can watch that map for splits, and basically my rule of thumb here is I want to be in whatever the biggest group that's the farthest forward is, meaning if there's 1 or 2 guys that are just a little bit off the front, I don't want to be with that. But if, say, 10 guys are getting away and then there's sort of like 2 or 3 space, 2 or 3, I got to get up to that front group of 10. So I'm trying to just sort of manage that, and then also keep an eye on the group behind me, because I want to make sure, I mean, really what I'm hoping here is that as some of these little gaps go out like we got right now, which I'm doing 400 watts just to stay in this group, I want to stay tight to the guy on the pink bike's wheel and then hope that a few more of these guys are going to filter in. It seems like that's not happening. There's a little bit of a gap growing behind me. So using my aero power up here to try and get across, it's a bad sign that I'm having to use a power-up this early, but there are a few places on this course to get power-ups, so I'll talk about that a little bit as well. One thing, you want to save a good power-up for a key moment if you have one, But I would say this is a key moment. I got across that gap where some guys were getting dropped, and now I'm back in this big group, and it's going to be obviously not easy, but easier. I definitely can't say that it's easy. It's doing over 300 watts pretty consistently here just to stay with this group. But glance back there, and you can see that behind me things are opening up. So I'm in the right place. I want to be in this bunch rather than in that no man's land, sort of fighting for scraps and jumping wheel to wheel. At least if I'm the position I'm in right now, I'm consistently drafting as these guys kind of shift around me. So that was a crucial moment. That was a good time to use a power up. What you don't want to do is waste a good power up, but what you also don't want to do is hold on to a power up too long and then miss some of those opportunities to get a new one, because as much as that aero helped me there, maybe if I had held on to it too long and gone through the next arch where I'm going to get a power up, I could have had 2 arrows and had that same advantage twice. So I know there's like a certain amount of strategy and like game theory, and a lot of people will say as soon as you get an aero, just hold on to that because you're going to need it in the sprint. But my argument here would be that it doesn't matter if I have an aero for the sprint if I can't see the front or I'm not even in the conversation. And sticking this group, we're going 52K an hour, which I'm barely doing it in the group, but I definitely on my own, if I lose this group, I'm going to be going much, much, much slower. And this early into the race, the longer I can hang on to this group, the further up the road they're going to drag me. And it's sort of a cost-benefit analysis, because on a stage like stage 1, there is a single really big climb where a ton of time is going to be gained or lost, and basically the whole race is going to shatter and reshuffle. So I knew that it didn't matter so much if I was losing some of these really, really fast early groups, because I think some of those people were just pacing badly, and also this flat section is not where that flat section was not going to be where most of the time was made on the day. Most of the time was going to happen on the climb, especially the radio tower. If you're not doing well there, you can lose a lot. So this is a different situation where this flat section really is the majority of the course, and your speed here is going to account for the lion's share of your time on the day as a whole. So I'm really trying to, I know that I'm probably not going to be able to stick this group all the way. I certainly can't keep doing, I think 270 right here is about as low as I've been able to go. So my threshold is somewhere between like 285, 295. I think about as good as I ever get it. Like if I do a full base build specialty plan coming into cyclocross season, I've gotten up to about 305, 310. It's hard to say exactly because generally I'm at my peak when I'm coming into an event, and I don't want to retest when I'm, about to do an A event. So that's a little bit of speculation, but I know I get up over 300 when I'm really, really peaking, which I'm not right now. So be that as it may, I've basically been over threshold for this entire first 7 or 8 minutes, and you can see I'm really struggling to stay in contact here, but I'm trying to do as much as I can to stay in contact. And I'm also trying to make some of these guys behind me sort of smooth out some of these surges for me. So the way that works is, as long as I know there's a few guys behind me and those guys are committed to staying with this group, when the speed kicks up a tiny bit, I hope that some of those guys will kick and come around me and filter into that gap. And then as the speed goes down a little bit, I stay pretty solid, pretty steady power, and hopefully I'm going to filter forward a few positions. That way I can sort of manage my effort without having to do a bunch of spikes. And I'm trying to do that here, but I'm getting to the back of this group. That's me checking back, and there are a couple guys back there, but they're gapped off. So my hope that they're coming around is pretty low. So I'm kind of starting to do some math in my head, like, okay, I'm well over threshold here. I'm just barely hanging on to the back of this group. How far can I do this? How long can I do this? Because there is going to be a point of diminishing returns where if I completely blow myself before that 5-minute climb, I'm probably going to go backwards further on the climb if I'm totally blown than I will by dropping back right now and sort of pacing myself into it. So this is my next strategy, is to try and get in the middle of this blob. I did a little bit of an effort to get in the middle, and you can see I'm doing slightly lower power there, at least for a second, and I'm hanging in. So what I'm doing here is trying to get into the middle of this group where there's a lot of people who can filter forward and filter back, and I'm always going to be getting a draft because these guys are very tightly bunched. And then once I'm in there, I'm trying to find, I'm going to call it finding the floor, which is like, what is the minimum wattage I can do and I'm not getting tailed off this group? So there's always sort of a range of watts you can be in, and RGT is a lot more explicit about this, about who you're drafting, how hard they're going, and then, you know, what it'll take to go over the top of them and what wattage will get you tailed off the back. That is always changing as that person pedals and surges and their power changes and the gradient changes. But especially on a flat road in a group that's running really consistently like this one, you can sort of find that pace. And it seems, unfortunately for me, what I'm finding here is like the floor of this group is just slightly over my threshold. You can see I hit 285 for a second there, and I started sliding backwards, and that's probably right around my threshold. And that's like if I'm going to go max for an hour, which is like 7 watts a kilo for me or something, 7 or 8, somewhere in there. Not bad, but also I'm definitely not the strongest guy here. So that's part of why I'm thinking about the strategy so much, is I really gotta make the most out of what I have here. And I do know that what I've got is 5-minute efforts I'm okay at those, and I'm also pretty resilient. So the fact that it's a 5-minute effort and then there's a descent immediately, which I think the descent will probably take me, I'm estimating at this point, because this is one of the new France routes that I have not ridden. I rode the flatter version of this the day before in another video. I'll link that at the end, where I accidentally dropped in on the Pro Tour de France while I was watching it. That was pretty fun, but I maybe did a little bit harder of an effort than I should have the day before, knowing I really wanted to go full gas for this. But it is what it is. You're watching me pay for it right now. So I've done some experimentation. I've tried working my way into the middle of this group. I've tried sort of finding the floor. I've tried sliding to the back and just hanging on for dear life. And there's basically nothing I can do to consistently stay at or below my threshold here. And knowing that this is going to be an hour-long effort, that's pretty much what it's going to take. So now I'm sort of doing the calculation in my head of like, where do I want to drop? So knowing the profile of this course, what I want to do is stay in this group until a few K, maybe 2 or 3K out from the first climb, drop off this group, get into a pace that is a little bit more sustainable for me so I can hit that first climb, because I might blow up spectacularly if I was doing over 300 all the way into the first climb. And again, the first climb is very small, but you can blow up spectacularly on a small climb if you've been over threshold for 15, 20 minutes. So I want to drop off before that climb. I don't want to. I'm going to have to. This is going to be the way that I'm going to get the best result on the day. I'm going to have to drop out of this group at some point, probably a couple K before the climb, so I can get a couple K of, obviously not easy pedaling, but if I can just go from this like slightly above threshold effort to a slightly below threshold effort, the difference is going to be gigantic for me in terms of my effort level and how fresh, how loaded up my legs feel. You know, you start getting that feeling that like they're burning, and people say they're loaded up with lactic acid or whatever. Whether or not that's actually what you're feeling, beside the point, but we all know that feeling where your legs are welling up and the effort is really getting to you. If I'm just below threshold, I can really get rid of that feeling and punch over the climb. And on a course like this, punching the climb and then going easy over the top is sort of going to be the way to go. Looking back right here, it looks like we may be sort of splitting into two groups. And another thing I'm thinking here is someone on the front, it feels like we're just motor pacing, just absolutely motor pacing. Hitting these cobbles here, I kind of know that the cobbles take a little bit more power to stay on the wheel. There's a little bit more rolling resistance. So I'm looking back as these groups are splitting. I'm in the no man's land between them. And I'm just saying, like, all right, this is probably my spot to head back to the other group and start to back off the power here slightly. And I'm sort of starting to accept my fate. I'm kind of hoping that I'll get in with these guys and then they'll just pull it back. Using the drafting boost immediately because I really need recovery here. And there's a last-ditch effort from some of these guys to bring this back together. I was hoping that some of those guys, I was in the middle of a split, that we would just settle in and still have a good working group of like 5, 8, something like that, so that we would still be rolling pretty fast, because as in real life, it's easier to go faster with a bigger group. But looking back, there's nobody on the map behind me, really. It's starting to thin out for sure. So now it looks like I'm at the back of a second group. So I'm going to try and hang on here, see if we can form a little working group. It's clear that there's some attrition at the front. Another thing I'm thinking is, like I was saying, it feels like we're motor pacing, which to me, it's been like the same couple of guys up front this whole time, just doing like insane wattage. And either those are guys that are just so strong I don't need to hang with them, or someone is cheating, quote unquote. They're on uncalibrated, miscalibrated equipment. They have their weight too low, whatever they've done, which I know a lot of people get super bent out of shape about the realism or whatever, the cheating. And I would prefer everyone to be on correctly calibrated equipment and all that. So this is the first climb. This is that first little kicker. And I'm hoping that right here, seems like we got like a substantial gap in front. I'm hoping that this is going to form a working group. This is the Aqueduct KOM, which to call it a KOM is kind of a misnomer. So I'm hoping here, like, those couple guys behind will catch us, and then the 4 or 5 of us will scoop up a couple of the dudes that are being tailed off there, and then that'll be the group. So in these big races, I basically know that big race, Fondo, whatever you want to call Letap, I don't know what you want to call it, but this is one of the biggest events on Zwift, and just law of large numbers, you're going to get a couple people that are cheating either intentionally or unintentionally, and rather than get all bent out of shape about it and yell at them in the chat and just like lose my mind and quit Zwift, I just see it as part of the game. Like, you got to know that they're doing that and then use that, I won't say to your advantage, but just like, those are the conditions on the course, So part of what I'm thinking is hopefully maybe some of those guys get DQ'd on Zwift Power, or maybe even get a cone of shame in the game here. And then, maybe if the motor that's just motor pacing that group ahead gets pulled off the front, maybe they'll come back to us. And another thing is just knowing that they're going to do that. That's part of why I had to stick that group as long as I physically could at the beginning there, because I know the front group is going to include those guys, and they're going to set a pace that is just blistering fast. And if I can draft off that pace as long as I can, it's just part of the game. So especially, it gets a little better when you're doing like the USA cycling races or the like 3R Ride Real series, any of the like big races on Zwift that are on Zwift Power. That's another thing, is like a lot of those guys that are cheating are just going to get filtered out on Zwift Power anyway. So even if I'm in the second group on the road, the second group on the road may be the first group on Zwift Power, So try not to let it get to me too much. Again, obviously I would rather be racing all people who are, have their correct weight and all that, but there's nothing I can do to control it. All I can do is the best I can with the tactics and the knowledge that I have and the fitness that I have, and sort of knowing where that's at and getting a good effort. So exactly as I predicted or hoped for, we got a little group here. And when I say little group, about 8 guys, it looks like 8 or 9, which is, I mean, obviously a bigger group is always better, but it does seem like that's around the magic number for going fast on Zwift. Like a group, the smaller they get it than this, it's diminishing returns a little bit. So we can still see a couple guys, and this is another thing I think is going to keep happening, is there are going to be more people who fall off the pace of that front group, especially, I think, on the 5-minute climb. And I'm hoping that basically what's going to happen is guys are going to fall off the back of that front group, and then either we'll go straight through them or they will get in here with us and our group will start to swell. So I'll go from right here, I'm racing for like 20-something place, that'll start to drop down. So this is my group. I'm committed to this group. And right now I'm trying to save as much power as I possibly can, just like total minimum power. I'm screwing with my green screen. This is the first chance I've had to look at it and realize that something's changed. The light has changed or something. And a cloud has moved outside and the light's beaming straight in the window or something. So this is the first chance I've had to catch my breath at all. I'm going to try and fully take advantage of this because we do have the bigger climb coming up around, it should be right around here, right around 17 kn, I think is where it's going to start. So I did manage to get a few seconds there where I was below 200 watts, and you can see my heart rate went down from like consistently over 170 to 160-ish. And that doesn't seem like a big jump, but the higher you get in the heart rates, the more each beat per minute means, basically. So like the difference between 175 and 180 is a lot bigger than the difference between 160 and 165 in terms of perceived exertion or whatever. It looks like we got a little group off the front of us right here that we're going to pick up, so that's good. That's sort of reinforcing my theory, and I'm feeling good in the group that I'm in now. And I never know in these huge events, which L'Etape I think is probably got to be one of the most, if you put all of the different times that this happens together, one of the most well-attended events in the history of Zwift, I would think. Here's the start of the KOM, so I've got to quit screwing with my green screen and get my head in the game here. Luckily, it hasn't really tilted up, but another thing is I don't want to rip this group apart. Excuse the green screen. I will fix it in a second. I don't want to rip this group apart here, though. What I really want to do is keep this group together and then roll quickly over the top. The dumbest thing I could do here is put in a huge attack, shatter this group, waste a bunch of watts myself, and then we're all either... hopefully we're going to regroup on the downhill, and then it's like, why did I do that big attack? Or we're all going to be rolling solo, and each of us individually spaced, a few feet down the road, big gap, few feet down the road. We're going to collectively go slower than if we just stayed in a group. And it does seem like at this level, at this like pointy end of the race, most of these guys have a pretty good handle on what the tactics are. So none of them are just like absolutely putting the hammer down and trying to get away from this group right now, because the gap to the group ahead is pretty substantial. You're not going to just go across it on this climb. If you were, it's like, why are you in this group if you were going to go across it on this climb? You just got tailed off that front group probably because the pace was too high. So to do a big accelerate, it just doesn't make sense. And it seems like all these guys are getting it. So this first time up the climb is actually fairly tame. I had kind of planned to do more up the climb this time, but if these guys want to keep it right around this level, which is pretty sustainable for me, right around 5 watts a kilo, that's perfect because it's not slow, but it's also not killing me. So I'm just going to try and hang on this pace. Speaking of pacing, I wanted to talk a little bit about Jonathan Vaughters, the director of EF. After the virtual Tour de France stages this weekend, he had some comments like about how virtual racing is it's less like cycling and it's more like running. It's less like bike racing. And I think what he meant there is that the effort is paced more evenly. But I think maybe he's just been in this like world tour bubble for so long that he doesn't really remember what hour-long events are like. But in America, in American bike racing, we race a lot of hour-long events, whether it's cyclocross or crits or circuit races. And these virtual Tour de France stages, they're about an hour long, and that's partially for the broadcast sake, partially for parity so they can run a full women's event and a full men's event, and partially to keep people's just like mentally engaged in it, because how long can you watch these avatars just ride around? I mean, truthfully, how long can you watch the real stages of the Tour de France that are 5 or 6 hours? Like, I watch it, quote unquote, I leave it on in the background, but how much I'm actively watching it, really, I'm only watching the most exciting parts. And my personal opinion on this is that hour-long races are just a great length for a race. You're sort of just snipping out some of that boring stuff, and you're condensing it down to the most exciting moments where everything matters and there's not as much hanging out and just spinning. There's a lot less you have to just like talk about the castles and talk about the hay bales made into a bike that the French farmers have done, and talk about the region. I like watching the Tour de France, and I like listening to all that stuff, but if you really just want like racing action, an hour-long race is the way to get that. And so to say that this is more like running, I mean, it's more like an hour-long bike race. If you go to an IRL bike race, especially crit or cross, it's going to be full gas the whole time. And that's what he was getting at, is that you're basically just on the power the whole time. But it's not like this is a time trial effort either. It's very tactical. I mean, all the stuff I've been explaining, like you got to think about these cobbles, you got to think about the climbs, you got to think about where the groups are on the road, who you need to be drafting, who you need to be attacking, all that stuff, which in a running race, you're really not thinking about that. In a running race, maybe you're playing off of other people's pacing to some degree, but you're not doing that because of drafting. You're not doing that because it's going to affect you and your pacing. There's not this group dynamic. So to compare it to a running race, I think is kind of reductive. I think it's a much better comparison to compare these hour-long cycling races to hour-long cycling races. And, you know, I hate to come down on Vaughters like that, because I do love EF. I love everything they've been doing this season. I think that for a World Tour team, they're doing more for their sponsors than any other team is. Lachlan Morton is killing it. His Everesting record attempt and then completion, all the stuff he's been doing in lockdown is awesome. It's fun to watch. They've clearly been taking these e-races seriously. The whole alternative calendar thing is cool. I think they do understand that the way that pro cycling sort of interacts with amateur cycling is changing in a way, and the gaps and the types of cycling, they're trying to sort of like slot in and bridge those gaps, which is cool and is a good idea. Their kits look great. I mean, I love like Mitch Docker's podcast is awesome. If you haven't checked out Life in the Peloton with Mitch Docker, super entertaining podcast. A lot of good insight in there. All the Adam Hansen episodes are great, because Adam Hansen is one of the best minds in the pro Peloton, I would say. Anyway, off the EF thing, this descent, I don't want to do anything to break this group up. What I want to do is stay in the group and do the minimum I can. Now, I don't actually know this descent that well, so I would like to do some more super tucking, and you can see I get into it for a second here, but then the gradient goes below 3% and I come out of the super tuck. I can't fully trust it on this first one. This is my first time down this descent ever, and I watched the pro race at this point, but watching it and riding it, it's totally different, the sense you get. So I'm on 3%. I'm really testing my luck here, doing the super tuck on that 3%. And here's a guy with the cone of shame. It looks like he's just come back to us. His avatar is going completely crazy. I have a sneaking suspicion that this R. Ferraria character is probably on an unsupported trainer, meaning that Zwift doesn't have first of all, he doesn't have a power meter. Second of all, his trainer's not programmed in to where Zwift has like a power curve mapped out, like a virtual power curve for it, which is still a step down from a power meter and 2 steps down from a smart trainer. But if you're on an unsupported trainer, it basically caps you at 400 watts, I think. And so if you're on an unsupported trainer, you don't clamp your wheel down hard enough. You can pedal and you're just locked at 400 watts. You can't go above that, but you can make it really easy to just do 400 watts. So my suspicion here, seeing his cone of shame, is that, and we're over 20 minutes now, he's tripped whatever the new like anti-cheating algorithms are by putting out a performance that's probably on just the other side of physically possible, even for like a World Tour Pro. He's been dinged and his power has been capped. So part of what happens when you get that cone of shame is it throttles your power. But if you're throttling someone's power from 400 back to, say, 325, that's still not super punitive. So I think that's probably why he's able to hang in this group. I mean, this is all speculative, but it definitely tracks with what's going on. And it also tracks with how fast that front group was going in the beginning, that this joker was just doing 400 watts on his incorrectly calibrated, unsupported trainer and dragging the whole group along, which, again, law of large numbers, there's probably going to be someone doing that. Looks like we're coming up on a guy who I'm thinking probably came off the back of that front group. We're also reaching a point where we've been going so fast for so long, and you have some people who are like late joining this event. So this is the start of lap 2, got the route badge. You got people who are late joining, and you got people who are just going comparatively pretty slow. There are some people we're going to be catching that are falling off that front group, and then there are other people that we're catching that are going to be lap traffic. So I'm on the back of this group and realizing that the back of this group is now 20th, whether that's because people are rage quitting at the front because this guy who was pulling the whole time got popped and now they're going too slow, or they're just quitting because they got dropped from that group, or Zwift is crashing on them, which is a thing. I've been seeing a lot of people complain about, Zwift crashed on me in the Letap event. Zwift needs to get their stuff together. 9 times out of 10, that's actually your setup. You're probably pushing your setup to the absolute maximum. Most of the time, you're just riding around in Zwift. And then you get into one of these events that has thousands of people in it, and your system starts trying to render those 1,000 people on screen in real time, and it's pushing whatever you're running past its maximum. A lot of people who are complaining about that probably also don't have their like updates and stuff turned off. So if your computer, iPad, phone, whatever you're using is getting real hot and it's trying as hard as it can to render all these people on screen, and then some software decides I need to update, and your computer tries to put a little pop-up, that can be the thing that sends it over the edge and crashes it. So there's really nothing Zwift can do on Zwift's end to stop that from happening, other than maybe downscaling the graphics for everyone, which people who have a more capable machine probably wouldn't appreciate that. So what you can do is go into menu, then settings, and then set the laptop battery saver to off, plug your device in so you don't have to worry about the battery. And that'll reduce your system's sort of strain a little bit. And then also set your graphics to low. Or if you normally ride in 1440, go down to 1080p or 720. And if you're normally running 1080 or 720, go down to 540 just to be on the safe side. Honestly, I notice the graphics less when I'm going this hard. I think you probably will too, but if it's between crashing your system, mid-race and not crashing your system mid-race, I think most of us would probably give up a couple of pixels. And I think most people don't realize that that's on their end and not Zwift's end, or they don't want to hear that. Another interesting thing here, you just saw it on that side-on view, is Zwift makes everyone ride the same frame for this event. Everyone's on these Treks. The Trek, I believe this is a Madone. It's the aero bike, the Trek aero bike. They don't standardize the wheel sets, so you do still have a little bit of room to play with your setup on the wheel set side, performance-wise. And I went with the Zip 454s, which I just unlocked recently because they are pretty fast in a straight flat line, and they climb better than the super aero wheels like the Zip 808s, which... So I think in a 40K test, the 454s are maybe 1 or 2 seconds slower than the 808s on a flat, but they're like 8 or 10 seconds faster going up Alp to Zwift. So my thinking there is I'm willing to, 2 seconds on a flat is really not a huge margin. I'm going to be gaining or losing more than that just by my positioning in the group and my tactics and stuff. But the climb is where I'm going to get dropped or where I'm going to stick the move. So I'm trying to sort of split the baby there a little bit and do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You could, if you were, say, a heavier person and you're less worried about getting dropped on the flat, more worried about getting dropped on the climb, you could go with something like the lightweight brand wheels or some other lightweight, but not the brand lightweight, like the NV 3.4 SES, something that's going to be less aero but significantly lighter weight in Zwift. And that's going to help you a lot on the climb. You're going to have to push out, 5, 10, 15 more watts consistently the whole time to stay in the group. But, maybe the pace of the group on the flat is not so much of your concern. Maybe you're not being pushed to your absolute limit the way I was on that first lap. You'll notice here, this group is settling into a pace that is much more manageable for me. And I think now that some of those guys, or at least this one guy, got the cone of shame and came back to us, I think some of those guys up front have either burned themselves out or gotten DQ'd or whatever. It looks like the gap sort of settles in around 111. So it's like we're going a little slower, but they're also going a little slower up there. So it is what it is. And if you look on the map, there's a group kind of coming up to us from behind right here, which is honestly good. I don't have much desire to try and attack and stay away from that group. I think I would rather not let them, but just have them get in with us here and have a bigger group, maybe roll a little bit faster. Obviously, if they're gaining time on us, they're going a little faster than we are. So I'm noticing that and thinking, okay, I got to get my rest in here. Maybe when the second group hits, they might be pushing the pace a little bit, just trying to ride straight through us. So if the pace goes back up, I want to be ready for it. I want to be slightly recovered and able to hang, because the crucial moment at this point is going to be those two climbs. That's where, from this group, things are going to be won and lost. And it looks like right now I'm in 17th. I got 2 guys in front of me, so we're probably racing for 15th in this group. And, my hope is that number is going to keep going down, maybe on the climb. If I pace it well and people who are in that front group are on their limit, maybe we overtake several of those guys and could even be racing for a top 10. So, mentally, I'm sort of reframing my whole thinking here. I'm back in it. Not to say I ever fully lost it, but there were definitely moments there where I was like, ooh, my race is over. I'm in the 30s and I'm going backwards. There's not much to salvage. Again, I don't ever know how well I'm going to do in these huge groups with thousands of people, but I did top 1% last week, so top 1% would be awesome. That's kind of a good benchmark to shoot for, especially pre-Zwift power results, because then some of those people are going to get filtered out. You're going to go up a couple more places when those results come in. You can see Mont Saint-Michel in the distance here. That's I guess I haven't talked much about it, but this is the new France World. Welcome to France. I'm really liking the look of this France World. I was skeptical of how it would race, but I think this made for a really interesting race. It was pretty dynamic for me. I think this course specifically, this is the Casse Pattes, I don't know how to say it, CASSE-PATTES course. It's apparently translates to leg breaker. I think this course is going to race similarly to the Richmond Worlds course. It's got sort of some short, sharp climbs. I really like the Richmond Worlds course because it has a perfect ratio of climbs to flats, and I like that it sort of has like 3 different lengths and steepnesses of climbs that play differently. So I don't know, we'll see if I like this one more or less. It's hard to say from just one race, but I really like racing on that Richmond course. While we're on this flat here and I'm just trying to stick in this group, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the virtual Tour de France as a whole. Stages 3 and 4 were good, I thought. Maybe not as good as the first couple of stages, counterintuitively, because everyone was so excited about the France World. And again, I really like it. You can see Vaughters, I believe, in the background there. Huge mountain, and that's where we're going next weekend at this race. These stages I thought were going to be really interesting, but sort of because the profile is a little bit more innocuous and it is points-based racing. I thought there would be more little sprints, and maybe there were. I think the broadcasters they're still so used to, even Matt Stevens, who I think is doing a really good job given what he's given. The broadcasters and the whole feel and vibe of it is still sort of geared to how you would talk about a normal in real life bike race, which is like you really, really focus on who is going to be first across the line at the finish. You think of things in terms of breakaways. But I think in a race like this where everything is team-based and everything is points-based, you really got to start talking and thinking and showing the races within the race, meaning like it's not just who wins each intermediate sprint. It's like how far back do those points go? How many points does their team already have? I was talking with some people in one of the Zwift groups somewhere about, I think this points-based format, and we're not racing on a points-based format in my race here, but the virtual Tour de France itself, the pro race, actually is being raced like that. I think this format could be like the future of e-racing, especially on Zwift, where the traditional, like, a breakaway goes, maybe gets chased back, sort of like model of bike racing. It doesn't really play out because of the physics. I think a race with several small sprints coming from a main blob, and those sprints are points-based, and the point values can change. The places where points are accumulated can change. That could be like the thing. That could be really watchable. It could be really fun to do. But what Zwift is going to have to get their head around is a scoring system that makes sense. Like if you're playing, and this is where Zwift is going to have to start thinking about it like a game, like it is a video game. When you're playing another game, like you're playing Halo, there are teams and you're randomly assigned a team, or you can come in with your own team, which like, obviously, that's a feature you need to port over into Zwift. People can play together with their friends, or they can be, randomly assigned to these teams before the event. And then as you're playing, you know who's on which team. So, I don't know, maybe you make some people a certain, jersey color, some another, whatever. But you know who's on what team, and then you know which team is winning, and you know who's scoring points. So, like, regardless of the format of the particular match in like a first person shooter, like a Halo or whatever. I'm saying Halo because I'm old. I know that's like not one that people play anymore. Not even really one that I played a ton, but I think it sort of set the benchmark for like what these like online shooters, like what the culture around them and the norms around like how the whole system works. I think it's sort of like popularized and made that stuff mainstream and codified or whatever. So that's why I'm using it as an example. But you're playing Halo and somebody scores points. You know who scored the points. You know what team the points are going toward immediately. And that's done through some sort of heads-up display that you can see. And even if you're doing a match that has a complicated scoring system, it doesn't look complicated to you. It's doing all the math and the scoring and the placement, and you can just see like, okay, that guy's beating me. And then even if you don't know, like, I don't know, a headshot is worth more than like a normal kill, or like you don't have to know all of the exact mechanics of how those points are scored, but you generally know how to score them. The same way, like, you wouldn't have to know in your brain, like, okay, if I'm first across the line in this sprint, I get 20 points toward my team. And if I'm fifth across the line, I only get 2 points toward my team. But you just intuitively know, like, the farther forward I am on this intermediate sprint, the more points my team is going to get, and you know how far behind you are. So I think that's a model that, if Zwift wants to make this sort of points-based racing work, they're going to have to do that. And I've talked about it a little bit in other videos, but those were before the virtual Tour de France, so that's when this stuff was sort of still all in my head. And now that I'm seeing it, it's going to have to be, first of all, it's like confirmed for me that this is something that, it's not just me saying they should do this. Like, Zwift knows they need to bring their own like style of racing or format of racing. They need to, they've said it before, they want to not just replicate outdoor racing, but they want to bring something to the experience that outdoor racing can't give you. So it's like, it's a different discipline entirely. And I think, replicating the Tour de France and also doing that at the same time, there's some sort of like weird cognitive dissonance to that, but I'm glad they're at least starting to do it. I wonder if they're going to have the forethought or the wherewithal to realize that's the direction they need to go and go farther. I mean, I think them testing the boost mode thing shows that they're thinking around that type of idea of like, how can we provide something that people aren't already getting? But it also shows that maybe they don't have their heads fully wrapped around like how to deliver that. Yeah, I don't know. So that's something interesting to come out of the virtual Tour de France. The other big story this week was Astana dropping out, which Astana, they've always been kind of an old school team. And I was honestly surprised that like all of the World Tour teams really signed on to this. I'm pleasantly surprised that they signed on to race the virtual Tour de France and everything, but clearly some teams are taking it more seriously than others. And I think it's been interesting to watch teams like Rally or Drops, some of the teams that don't get an invite to the normal Tour de France, like how seriously they're taking it and how much they see this as an opportunity to show their team on a larger platform and really go toe-to-toe with the best in the sport. And then simultaneously you have these teams that have huge talent and huge backing, and they're sort of not taking this seriously. It honestly makes the racing a little bit more interesting because you see things like Freddie Ovett from Israel Startup Nation taking a win, partially just because he's obviously a very strong guy, but he's also put a lot of hours on Zwift. He knows what he's doing on Zwift, and he's taking Zwift very seriously. I think he was second on one stage and then won another stage, so it's clearly not just a fluke either. Like, he has a pretty good idea of what he's doing. Again, going up this KOM, I just want to make sure that if a split happens, I'm on the right side of it. So I'm pushing up to a relatively fast pace, but not overdoing it. And then getting back to what I was saying about the power-ups earlier, I'm going to pop my power-up right here so that I have a space to grab another power-up coming over the top. And that does help me get maybe a little bit more recovery right here, because it looks like people are they're trying to push the pace, and I do not want to get tailed off at all. Like, if this group cuts in half before the next descent, I want to be in that front half. And if not, I just want to have a new power up and save some watts, which getting a feather power up right here is kind of perfect, because pretty much the decisive factor from here on in is going to be that last time up the 5-minute climb. But getting back to the whole virtual Tour de France pro race Team Astana thing. So Team Astana is clearly not taking it seriously. They dropped out this week, which is funny. Like, people always drop out of the real Tour de France because, injuries or they get sick or whatever. Their excuses, they're at a camp, they're at a team training camp because supposedly real racing is starting soon. I don't know. We will see if that actually happens, but supposedly real racing is starting soon, and they, at their remote training base in the mountains somewhere, they say they don't have good internet connection, which it's funny to drop out after stage 4, and then you have 5 days until stage 5 Like nobody could find you a hotspot. Like the people down in Zwift HQ wouldn't overnight you one. So that's a convenient excuse for them. I'm sure that the super old school, super Euro, like, don't shave your legs the night before a race because the energy of the hairs pushing through your skin is going to be too much. Like that kind of thinking, kind of old school coaches over at Astana are like, what is this Zwift thing? This is stupid. Don't care about it. And they probably had a little bit of trouble because they half-assed getting their setup together. And I'll say I haven't really seen other Astana guys. Like I've dropped into random community races and seen Israel Startup Nation guys. I've seen EF guys. I've seen rally guys. I have not seen anyone from Astana just like even training on Zwift, racing aside. So that kind of shows that they're not taking it that seriously. It's interesting to watch though, because it does create this like almost more even playing field where you've got some teams that are like woefully unprepared because they just didn't think about it. They didn't take it seriously, but they have all of the strongest people with all of the biggest engines. And then you have these scrappy little teams like Rally or Drops who maybe don't have the same depth of talent, but they are really focused on this and really taking it seriously. And so watching them go toe to toe is it's really fun, honestly, for me. And I think some of those bigger teams are also still thinking of it in that like traditional, like they're not really doing the math on the points. And I think that's something like in real life, ButcherBox has done a really good job of that with the USA Crit series. They've done a great job of actually learning the point system of USA Crits and saying like, we want to win the points overall. And I know there have been some times where like they run a radio and their DS is on the side of the road and he's like doing the math and he's telling them like who's in what moves and where does each person need to be to score maximum points and how many points do we need to pull ahead. So like they have been able to, and like winning the team points classification is something that a lot of other teams like maybe aren't gunning for. So it's like they saw an opening where like we can take this, and then they actually figured out how to do it. And honestly, that's like what all of cycling is. That's like sort of extrapolating out. Cycling is always like figuring out what this complex system is, whether it's like your gear, or your nutrition, or your training, figuring out a complex system and then kind of optimizing it. So I think that adds another wrinkle and another just like thing to be interested in. And I like it. I know a lot of people argue for like racing should always just be the first guy across the line, but I don't know. It's like if that's not going to be exciting, then whatever. Speaking of exciting, so that group ahead, we have caught this group ahead. I don't know if they were just playing games with each other coming into the base of this climb or what the deal was, but I'm thinking I just need to stay where I'm at, and we're gonna catch them because people are popping power ups. It seems like we're getting closer and closer. Oh, we are so close to them right now. We are so super close. Looks like a 4-second gap, and I think that is the front of the race. If that's not the actual front of the race, I think that's probably the front of the race on Zwift Power, meaning like that's the front of people who are not cheating, I would think. So This is sort of my big mistake, big takeaway for the day. I am hurting right now. This hurts. But I could have stood up on one of these steeper grades and gotten across. And I make a couple of mistakes here. One is just generally not going across on a steep part because as a light guy, that's what I should be doing. The other is where I popped that power up, and it's just because I don't know this climb. So I popped that power up right before one of the shallowest grades on the climb just because I don't know it. And because Zwift doesn't have a great display that shows you the gradient of the climb coming up, RGT does a little bit better job of that. That's one of those things. But so what I should have done is save that power up right here. I should have hit it on this 7%. I should have hit the power up, gotten to that guy who's leading our group, and just slingshotted right around him. Used his draft because we're still going 25 kilometers per hour. I could have gotten there. Right now, I could get there and I could be in that group, and then I would be really like at the front of the race. And again, I'm not saying I'm not trying hard. Like this hurt so bad. This is taking everything I've got to do this effort right now. But if there's one thing I'm good at, it's standing up, putting in a short, sharp effort, and then just hanging. Like that's sort of my bread and butter, is like having a lot of those short matches. So if I had known this climb better, this wasn't the first time I was riding this course, I would have had a better idea. Especially like the race situation was perfect there. The point where we were the closest to that group ahead in terms of like meters or time gap or however you want to look at it was also when the gradient got the steepest. And that's the time when you can take back the most feet per second, if that makes sense. Like your attack is going to get you farther. It's going to do more on that steepest gradient. So that's a huge like missed opportunity learning experience for me, both in terms of just like I need to be better about identifying those crucial moments and actually snapping when I need to snap, and also just like remember how this climb works, because in the future, if I race on it, I mean, course knowledge is a big part of Zwift racing for sure, and it definitely helps. That's why you see like the bigger Zwift teams, so to speak, or whatever, like the Cameron Jeffers types, they will have a director sportif who's just like scrolling along with the route, and he's telling them things like, you know, after this next switchback, the gradient is whatever the gradient is, and they're sort of feeding them that information so that the rider themselves just knows what's happening. They don't have to be checking other things. And I definitely didn't have the brain power right here to like have Zwift Insider on a second screen and be looking at that or something. So I'm dying a million deaths right here, but I know that if these four guys are going to pull away, I need to stay with them. And honestly, that would be a pretty ideal scenario for me right now, is if we could roll over the top with a little bit smaller of a group, because I'm pretty much resigning myself. That was our one chance to catch that front group. They realized we were coming and they hit the gas again. And it seems like these guys that I'm in this group with, this is sort of a natural selection here. Like we're all in this group because we are sort of the slightly second tier or maybe first tier not cheating riders. But it looks like the front of our group is 13th now. So that's pretty solid. And looking at the total number of entrants, it looks like we had 1370 that started on time. So racing for 13th, we're right around that 1% mark. So in my mind, I'm like, cool, that's a benchmark. That's something to shoot for. 13th, I want it. I'm all in for 13th at this point. I'm not going to try and drag this group up to the group up the road. I'm racing for 13th. Like 13th is my first now, which this is again something that like you always have to do, whether it's Zwift racing or real life or whatever. Like I'm doing a in real life time trial this weekend, which I think I'm surprised there's not more of this going on, because I think in coronavirus times, time trials are one of the only things you can like really do 100% safely with no, apprehension about it. You know, I'm going to pre-register, show up in a mask, roll to the line, maybe be close to one guy with a stopwatch for a couple of seconds, do the whole ride, and then I'm done. And like, I'll take my mask off on the line, put it back on at the finish. Hopefully I won't see anybody out there unless I'm catching someone, but I'm not a great time trialist. But I say that to say, like, this sort of like resetting your goals and like looking at the race as like 13th is my first now. Like I am racing for 13th in my mind. At this time trial this weekend, I'm really sort of disregarding everybody else's results because I'm not a good time trialist. I don't have any time trial gear. I don't actually like doing time trials. I'm just doing it, support the sport because it's there. I think it'll be put on well, safe, responsibly, all that stuff. And it's like a new challenge, but I don't actually expect to do well. I think if I set my expectations of like, I'm going to get first in this time trial, even though I am bad at time trials and don't have any time trial gear and dislike doing them, that would be stupid. And I'm going to be disappointed. At the same time, to go out there and just not set any goals and just ride whatever feels right, I'm not going to push myself to my limit. So my goal there is I have a power plan that I'm set to, and I'm going to try and stick to that, and hopefully that'll push me to my absolute limit. My plan is to try and average 285. It's a 40K TT. 285 watts should be like an hour and 2 minutes, hour and 5 minutes. I don't know. But going to try to do a negative split, going to try and average like 280, 285. But that's my goal. My goal is to stick to my plan and then just see where that gets me. Much like my goal right here is to get 13th, not to get first. So it's like, whether it's a process goal or an outcome goal, setting something that's like it's going to be hard to get 13th right here. It's going to be really hard for me to do 285 for an hour in the summer heat of Alabama by myself with no carrot to chase. But both of those are like goals that I think will push me to my max, but they're attainable. And I think that's an important way to look at racing. So with that 13th place goal in mind, we're coming into the last kilometer here. I got a van power up, which I'm going to say everyone wants the aero power up to sprint with, but actually I think for a group like this, the van might be a better way to go. The van power up lasts a lot longer than the aero helmet, and what it does is improves your draft. It makes it easier to draft people. So I'm doing the math in my head. I'm about 45 seconds out, which I think is about how long the van power up lasts. So as people start to kick their sprint off here, the van power up is going to make it easier for me to stay in their draft for longer. And then we're inside the last few meters, so just all out here. And it's easier for me to accelerate around, and boom, won the field sprint. Hour and 23 seconds even. But yeah, I think like drafting power up maybe in a sprint like that where I got several people around, that might be my new favorite. I think the way Zwift sprints tend to start really early and go really long, it might actually be a better way to go. I'm gonna keep testing that. But yeah, thanks you guys. Like and subscribe. See you next time.